Hello, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, a protest at the Western Wall leads to violence. Starting this week, thousands of IDF soldiers can look forward to an incredible new benefit, and a young Israeli becomes a universal star. I'm Natasha Kirchak here with the latest news in Israel. This morning, for the first time in history, women prayed at the Western Wall with Torah scrolls. Now, while the moment is being celebrated as a historical one for many liberal Jewish groups, it sparked major outrage in the ultra-Orthodox community. Scuffles broke out at the Western Wall this morning as at least 100 liberal Jewish women made their way towards the Western Wall with Torahs in hand. The walk was a first in a series of events planned by liberal Jewish groups in protest of the ongoing restrictions on non-Orthodox worship at the site. According to the Israeli Reform Movement, dozens of Torah scrolls were carried into the women's section of the Western Wall, causing ultra-Orthodox onlookers to lunge for the protesters in an attempt to physically bar them from entering the prayer area. Police were forced to intervene and separate the groups, but did not intervene with the pluralistic protest. As per usual, the prayer and protest came at the start of the new month on the Hebrew calendar, just one day after the Israeli Prime Minister urged Reform Jewish movements to hold back from voicing protest over the status quo on worship at the holy site. Pluralistic groups remain unconvinced. For members of the Women of the Wall group, which campaigns for pluralistic prayer service, the occasion was a momentous one. Rabbi Gilad Kariv is the head of the Reform Movement in Israel, and he believes that the Western Wall won't be the same after today because the Israeli government will now be forced to return the holy site to the hands of the entire Jewish people. Last January, a compromise was passed calling for a permanent prayer platform to be built along the West Wall for pluralistic prayer, but so far that compromise has failed to be implemented. Last January, a bill ordering the creation of a mixed-gender prayer space at the Western Wall was passed, but nearly 1 year has passed and nothing has been built. So, as we just reported, over 100 women marched with Torahs in hand towards a holy site in Jerusalem this morning, in protest against the government's refusal to act. Joining me in the studio today is Rabbi Belkin, the Director of Diaspora Affairs at the Israeli Reform Movement, and he's here to help explain what's going on. Thanks so much for coming
Shalom.
in. So, the bill was passed. Why is that not enough to build the section? What is the government waiting for?
Well, the government is not waiting for anything except for the fact that the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox parties within the government, is threatening Netanyahu that if he fulfills the agreement that they signed on originally, that they will withdraw from the government. And therefore, the bill has passed a year ago, as you said, but the implementation of the bill is not happening because of the threat of the ultra-Orthodox parties to leave the government. So we are in a kind of a very tricky situation where we, for several months, discussed and negotiated this bill with all the parties, and behind the scenes were the leaders of the ultra-Orthodox community as well. And once we signed the bill and the government passed it within its own decision, and nothing happened, we had nothing else to do but protest.
Now, why is this such an issue? I know that seems like a very basic question, but what are the problems with building this shared section for those of our viewers who are not aware?
We have to start from the beginning. The Western Wall, the Kotel, is one of the holiest places for Jews, maybe the holiest place for Jews around the world, including Israel. And the majority of the Jewish population outside of Israel, I'm talking about more than 4 million Jews living outside of Israel, are looking up to the Western Wall and expecting to be appreciated for their beliefs. They're expecting the government of Israel to allow them to practice their way of Judaism in an egalitarian and fair way. And the bill had to do a very simple thing. The bill just had to extend the existing Israel section, which is south of the local section in the Western Wall, and to have the platform higher than the way it is now, bigger and higher, and have the entrance to the Western Wall just one. Because the current situation is that the Israel section, which was decided on a few years ago by Minister Bennett. Now we have it very low, very small, with a separate entrance. And what we would expect the Israeli government to do is appreciate the Jews living outside of Israel. And as we always say, the state of Israel is the state of the Jews wherever they are. And therefore, appreciation of their behaviors and their ways of living is something which we cannot wait any longer.
Now, violence broke out today at this protest, and I think we can all agree that that behavior is not condoned. But how can such a scene be avoided in the future, or is this something we're going to keep on seeing given the current situation?
I must describe to you, I was there before 6 a.m. in the morning and experienced what you were just describing. And in fact, we were about, I wouldn't exaggerate, 300 to 350 people walking with 12 Torah scrolls into the main plaza of the Western Wall, wanting the women's section or the women of the wall to take 1 or 2 Torahs and enter their section with no men and fulfill their desire to pray there with Torah at the Rosh Chodesh service, Shacharit service in the morning. We were walking, and people paid by the Kotel Heritage Foundation were beating us up. And all we did is holding the Torah. And we surrounded the people who held the Torah just to make sure that the Torah is not hurt. A lot of my friends got really hit. They were smugged and they were kicked and they were tried to be pushed aside. The head of the reform movement in Israel was on the floor, as well as the head of the conservative movement, Izhar Hess. It was a very, very sad point, and I agree with you. Violence is not the way, and there must be a respect to our need to show the entire world that the Jewish state respects all its denominations.
Do you think the protesters expected that to happen?
You know what? The only thing the protesters wanted is to have a Shacharit service at the Western Wall. I mean, there was not a protest. Can you imagine a woman being avoided from entering a synagogue in North America or in Europe or in Asia and not holding a siddur, a prayer book? Can you imagine a woman being told not to enter a synagogue or a section in the synagogue? In our opinion, this is unheard of. So this was not a protest. This was a desire of people to actually express their way of behavior and their way of praying at the wall.
Now, the Israeli Prime Minister has, I guess in a way, come out against the idea of protesting, saying that there should be a more quiet way that this issue can be solved. Do you believe that there is a way to address this issue without people standing up and going to the Western Wall and praying in the manner that they prayed today?
Well, it's interesting that the Prime Minister have issued this announcement today, because it's on the Prime Minister's responsibility that this bill, which he signed on, has been postponed for over a year. So my expectation from the Prime Minister is to look around him, and instead of accusing international bodies like UNESCO for putting aside Israel and cursing Israel, having looked at himself and see how he, by his own actions, his own government's action, is really postponing and not allowing the liberal movements, the progressive movements around the world and in Israel, and I would say pronounce their way of thinking. We were not violent. This is not our way. And indeed, if the Prime Minister would implement the agreement, we will be there, the first one to be there and be happy about it. It's his internal government and his own government he needs to do the discussion with, not with us. We have agreed. We have signed it.
Who are some of the major parties that are behind this movement, and how did you get involved?
Which movement are you talking about? The reform movement in Israel?
Yeah, the reform movement. Well, there's organizations like Women of the Wall, so on and so forth.
The reform movement internationally is a movement that was created about 250 years ago in Germany. Modernity came to place 250 years ago. Jews were allowed to go to universities, and Enlightenment was also welcoming Jews in the society, and Jews wanted to maintain their Judaism. And as a result of that, the Reform movement, the Reform Jewish movement, have established its stream. The Orthodoxy obviously didn't like it. They wanted people to stay in the shtetl, in the city, in the old framework of Jewish behaviors, which of course did not fit most of the Jews of the time. So it started in Central Europe, it moved then to North America, and for about 65 years, the movement has moved into Israel and has established so far over 65 synagogues and communities here, congregations. And I would say, just a rough number, I would assume 250,000 Israelis now affiliate themselves with the reform and progressive movements. As I said before, over 3 million Jews around the world are part of the progressive movement.
So that's what I actually wanted to ask about. You know, a lot of the people that I guess would be more affected by, the creation of an egalitarian prayer plaza would be foreign Jews. Jews are here that are traveling. How do you think, having this type of prayer space would influence foreign Jewry?
I think you're so right. I mean, this will impact the foreign Jewry, foreign tourists who come here and would like to perform a service, a ceremony within the Western Wall area, and not be separated from the children who are coming to the age of bar or bat mitzvah. But it's not only for them. I must tell you that living in Israel and being originally from the secular Israeli society as a child, I also faced a situation where, you want to find a place, one of the holiest places for the Jews, and you wanted to get closer to God, and you wanted to be among people who you like, and you had to be separated. My own bar mitzvah had to be away from the women who were part of my life. My mother was not there, my sister was not there, my grandmother was not there. Why? Because we had to niche ourselves in the men's section, and that was a pity, and we're trying to change it not only for foreign Jews, but also and mainly for the Israeli population, the secular population who's willing to have this area.
So I guess as a final question, what do you think this issue says about Israeli society today, given the fact that, we're seeing Palestinians and Israelis fight over lots of holy sites in Jerusalem, but Jews themselves are fighting internally over these spaces?
History tells us that internal fights are not healthy, and we did the utmost to prevent all the internal fight that we see these days around holy places and in other areas. The mikvaot bill, the mikveh bill, which does not allow progressive Jews to enter. This is a bill that was passed just a few months ago, and we are again being discriminated and put aside. All those actions of ultra-religious parties to segregate the Israeli society between the ultra-Orthodoxy and the secular Israelis is not going to happen anymore. This is a train that left the station already. We are beyond that. We're at the stage that Jews in Israel are interested in pluralism, in an egalitarian way of pronouncing and behaving, and are not willing to go back to the old paradigm saying, I'm either an ultra-Orthodox or I'm none. They want their spiritual life to be expressed also in those places of sacred moments.
Well, thank you so much for coming in. I guess we're just going to see what the future of the implementation of an egalitarian plaza will be.
Thank you very much for hosting me.
Last August, the Israeli Defense Forces announced a new plan to pay for veterans' university and professional degrees. That program will officially kick off this week, but now it's even been extended to include newly released male combat soldiers. If you've just been released from the IDF or come from a special background and enlisted in the Army after July of 2013, there's a new special benefit to look forward to. The soldiers that fall under that category will only have to pay a third of their higher education tuition, and the IDF and Defense Ministry will pay for the remaining 2/3. The new project, called From Uniform to Studies, will cater to all soldiers from special backgrounds, such as new immigrants, lone soldiers, and minorities. The IDF hopes to help around 40,000 former soldiers every year, and then extend the project to former non-combat soldiers in accordance with the nature of their service. The new initiative is similar to the famous GI Bill that helped pay for tuition of around 16 million American soldiers after World War II. In Israel, the ultimate plan is to open up the program to all soldiers from combat and non-combat units alike. A move like that would have a major impact since almost every 18-year-old in Israel is obligated to enter the military. The Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has just made several public statements about current affairs. But he's continuing to recite positions that Israel has long ago dismissed or vehemently opposes. ILTV's Aaron Porras has more on the story.
Speaking from Bethlehem during a meeting with visiting Italian President Sergio Mattarella, Abbas praised the recent UNESCO resolutions denying Christian or Jewish ties to Jerusalem's Temple Mount. Abbas claimed the document will protect the global human heritage of the compound, even though they referred to it exclusively in Arabic as solely a Muslim holy site. The Palestinian leader said he respects Judaism and wants to see Jerusalem remain open for worship by the followers of all three monotheistic religions. But he then went on to repeat his accusations that Israel wants to alter the status quo on the Mount. That dangerous charge has sparked many Palestinians to launch terror attacks in so-called attempts to defend the Al-Aqsa Mosque, even though Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has denied any such intention many times. Abbas went on to say that the Palestinians see peace as a strategic goal, but that the full Israeli withdrawal from the Jewish biblical territory of Judea and Samaria is, quote, the only key to peace. He then reaffirmed his commitment to a two-state solution he wants to pursue through the French and Arab peace initiatives, while Netanyahu insists the peace process can only be resumed through direct negotiations between the two sides. During his own meeting with Mattarella this morning, the Israeli Prime Minister said that Palestinians need to exorcise the demon of wanting to destroy the Jewish state. He says he's turned to Abbas as well as Hamas to ask if either Palestinian faction would recognize a Jewish state if the so-called settlement issue was solved. Netanyahu then stated, but of course they won't, because the real settlement issues are Tel Aviv, Jaffa, Haifa, and all the other cities in Israel.
Israeli Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked says that Israel and Jews around the world must start working together to fight BDS because, in her opinion, it's a new form of anti-Semitism. And that's not all. ILTV's Steve Leibowitz sat down with the Israeli official who says she's also fighting to create an egalitarian prayer section at the Western Wall.
The State of Israel stands firm against all those inciters and hostile parties at home and abroad, relying upon its moral strength, its military power, and the righteousness of its faith. Hence, from Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, I would like to say to all those agents of falsehoods, ignorance, and hatred, I do not suggest to any one of you to put our strength to the test, neither our determination to defend the State of Israel on all fronts. The Temple Mount and the Western Wall are the lifeblood of the Jewish people, and Jerusalem, the unified city, was and shall remain the eternal capital of the Jewish people and the State of Israel forever and ever.
Ayelet, what was your message today to the Jewish Agency?
There were a few, I think. One is that the Israeli Spring is still struggling here in the chaos of the Middle East. And the Jewish communities all over the world are very important in order to keep the security of Israel here. I talked about the BDS movement, the fact that we need to fight it, the fact that it's just a new form of the old anti-Semitism. Also, I said that, of course, we have responsibility for all the Jewish people around the world, and it doesn't matter how they practice as a Jews.
In fact, responding to a question, you made a promise to continue to push for a women's section and egalitarian section at the Western Wall.
Yeah, we said that the Kotel plan that the government of Israel vote for is acceptable, and that I will do anything we can to help the Prime Minister who is leading it to implement it.
Rabbi.
A whopping 75% of Jewish American university students are reporting they've heard hostile remarks about Israel on campus, and a significant 20% say they've been blamed for Israel's actions simply because they're Jewish. These statistics have just been released in a new study that has found that the increase in anti-Semitic incidents is directly correlated with the BDS movement. The study from Brandeis University finds that the anti-Israel boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is a culprit behind the harassment. Those surveyed say the malice that activists generate towards Israel is often deflected onto the Jewish student body at large. Another major factor linked to hostility on campus is the presence of the radical Students for Justice in Palestine group that exhibits open hatred of Israel and often Jews as well. Some of the worst schools where this is happening include Brooklyn College and Northwestern. Other Jewish students at different schools with high harassment levels, such as Rutgers and the University of Illinois, say the antagonism they face really doesn't have a lot to do with Israel, but is based on traditional negative stereotypes about the faith. The authors of the study concluded that more emphasis should be placed on educational strategies to dispel anti-Semitism. Meanwhile, students in neighboring Canada are welcoming a decision from an umbrella group representing 97 universities. They've just added a category called Places of Origin to their anti-discrimination criteria. This means Israel can no longer specifically be targeted by hate groups, and it will soon be far more difficult for BDS groups to operate on Canadian campuses. With the 2016 U.S. presidential election only 6 days away, a lot of American citizens in Israel are very unhappy they never received their absentee ballots. Now, some are accusing a local voting group for obstructing their requests rather than facilitating them as promised. I Vote Israel was actually founded by American Israelis themselves, under a banner of making it easier to register and cast ballots. The group set up drop boxes all over Israel over the past 3 months where people could send in their absentee ballot requests and then return them once they were filled out, to be sent to the U.S. postage free. But now quite a few frustrated citizens from both parties are accusing I Vote of deliberately not forwarding their documents, out of favoritism towards one of the candidates. I Vote is strongly rejecting the claims and insisting it's bipartisan. The group's director says the unsent ballots were likely due to voter request forms that were filled out illegibly or incorrectly. But don't worry, it's still not too late. If you're an American living in Israel who didn't get your ballot, remember all you have to do is download and print out a federal write-in absentee ballot, which is valid in every state. All you have to do is drop it off directly at the American embassy or U.S. consulate, but you'd better be quick. Now, here's an interesting story for you. An Israeli has just been crowned Mr. Universe, and yes, you heard that correctly. I said Mr., not Mrs. This may not be your typical beauty pageant, but these young men are definitely strutting their stuff. ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh has more on the story.
On Sunday, Israeli bodybuilder from Zichron Yaakov, Kobi Ifrach, was declared Mr. Universe in the under-22 juniors division. The international tournament was held in Birmingham, England, and has been organized annually for the past 67 years by the National Amateurs Bodybuilders Association. Ifrach now holds the title for the first ever Israeli to win the NABBA junior title, which has been previously won by famous movie star and former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. 20-year-old Ifrach states he was inspired by his older brothers who were both amateur bodybuilders. He has won multiple tournaments all over Israel and plans to continue to compete alongside his coach, Danny Kognovich. Ifrach was presented the Mr. Universe Cup in Israel on Sunday by Yoni Hanan, president of NABBA and former winner of Mr. Universe in the tall category. Congratulations, Kobe.
And now for our Hebrew word of the day. Sometimes it can seem like nothing is going your way, as if Murphy made his law especially for you. That's why it's so important to hold on to your wishes. So today's word is halevai, or I wish. Say your friends invite you to a party, but you have to work late. You can answer with alevai, or maybe you're a little scared to try something new that interests you. You might say alevai about it. Even looking up at a rock star from the crowd and wishing to be up there yourself, feel free to say alevai. The main thing to remember is that wishes are great at showing the door, but we have to walk through on our own. So carpe diem, and don't let halevai become an associate to regret. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast.
ILTV's weather forecast is sponsored by Adopt a Savta, taking care of Israel's lonely Holocaust survivors.
Tonight will be partly cloudy with a low of 60 degrees or 16 degrees Celsius. Expect tomorrow to be partly cloudy with a rise in temperatures and a high of 82 or 28 degrees Celsius. All right, everybody, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.81 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv. Thanks for watching and see you tonight.